Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the video. We're going to be going through the daily tech news. There's a couple of interesting pieces that I wanted to discuss today. This video is slightly shorter than usual because I need to be getting back to Dark Souls 3 in just a moment, because I've been waiting for it to download and install, and we're going to be doing some recording of that title because I'm kind of curious about it. But anyway, I'm digressing somewhat. On today's subject matter, we're going to be talking about GDDR5X and the fact that supposedly shipments are going to start in the second half of this year. We'll get into that in just a second. And also Nvidia's Pascal architecture and the fact that it's supposedly going to have problems of asynchronous compute yet again, which is very similar to Maxwell. But first things first, as I said, GDDR5X. So just to get everyone onto the same page, GDDR5X is an evolution of regular R5. I don't want to keep saying GDDR5 or GDDR5X because it's a pretty damn unwieldy. So regular R5 compared to R5X, the Cliff Notes version is that R5X offers up to twice the bandwidth. It offers that without requiring additional energy. In fact, it does it actually more efficiently. And on top of all of that, it doesn't cost that much more money to produce, and on top of all of this, I know we're stacking it, right? It does it in a very similar manner. The pinout can be very similar, the memory controller can be very similar to regular R5. What this means is, let's say that we are referring to the Pascal architecture for a moment, and you say that you've got the GTX 1070 and the GTX 1080. Let's assume that those chips are essentially the same thing. The difference is with the 1070 you've maybe got some shaders disabled, some ROPs disabled, maybe some cache disabled. You know the drill. Well, let's assume that regular R5 is used for the 1070 but R5X is used for the 1080. What this means is that the the manufacturers are easily going to be able to use pretty much the same PCB. They're going to be able to just switch around a few bits here and there as required, but it means that the actual core is going to be a lot easier to produce. They don't need to worry about, oh, okay, I'm going to have to redesign like 90% of all of the memory area, all of the memory interface to handle a different memory controller and stuff like that, because we've got these two memory standards. It makes things a lot simpler, which is obviously a really good thing in this case. So what do we know? Well, as I said, Micron are already commencing memory sampling, which is pretty great. It's basically one of the last stages in the process before the introduction to it is completely finished. And obviously Nvidia and AMD are two major customers for this. They are currently getting their samples. They're starting to use them to fine-tune graphics cards, and this does tie in rather nicely for rumours for both Pascal and Polaris, which we've talked about all over the last couple of days. And Micron are basically ramping up for mass production, which should start hitting full volume production at some point early summer, which is really good news, as I said, for the graphics cards, as we've discussed over the last couple of days or so. Now, there's a very good chance that you've heard of asynchronous compute. It's been pretty synonymous with DirectX 12, the next generation of consoles, that would be the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, but particularly the PS4, and AMD have been touting it as, I guess you could say, the equivalent of being able to turn a pebble into gold. It has been rather interesting, however, that Nvidia's Maxwell architecture just didn't handle asynchronous compute as well as AMD's GCN architecture. Now, the reasoning behind that is because AMD's GPUs have an asynchronous compute engine, which was a unique piece of hardware that they added to the GPUs. We'll get more into that in just a second. However, a lot of folks hoped that Pascal would fix all of this. It would fix the errors of Maxwell, and we would see obviously a rather large bump in performance. However, that does not seem to be the case. New rumours are swirling around, and I have done this in an article as well, because There's a lot of links that you can check out if there's something here you're not too familiar with. I've linked it all, so you don't need to start digging through tons of my videos. But basically, a new rumour is swirling around that, and this rumour comes from Bits and Chips, that the hardware found in Pascal just hasn't sufficiently evolved when it comes to asynchronous compute, and it still doesn't offer a big performance jump relatively to Pascal, to Maxwell. Instead, it's going to rely heavily on pure brute force and ignorance to achieve high performance. Now, there were some rumours that Nvidia's GPUs could not even execute asynchronous compute, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Some folks constructed some benchmarks and they said that it does work, but once you start getting to certain workloads, high workloads, AMD cards just basically ruffle stomp Nvidia's. And this is once again thanks to asynchronous compute engines. So what is asynchronous compute? Because you're probably like, well, I've heard of it, but what does it do? It basically looks for bubbles in the graphics pipeline. Essentially, while you may not realize this, when your game is running, there are thousands of shaders in a GPU, which are all being used to process a scene. Now, they're being issued instructions. It could be draw this. It could be, paint that green. It could be, well, okay, you need to construct this table, and that table needs to be 3 feet off the ground, and basically different processors will be doing these different tasks. So, for example, you could actually have a graphics queue where you're going to have, say, shadow maps, or it could be that you need to run geometry or something like that. But as you all know, compute is becoming really important. Compute could be anything from physics, it could be tone maps, it could be certain forms of anti-aliasing, it could be certain forms of lighting, lots of different stuff, right? Now, what is an ideal situation is if you can run those concurrently. So what asynchronous compute engines do is that they help the commands execute in parallel. It shares GPU resources. So if you get a bubble where, let's say, for the sake of argument, the graphics are there's just nothing that needs to be done, or there's certain shaders that aren't being used, or certain resources that aren't being used, asynchronous compute engines could go, I'll use those, thanks, and it will swoop in. Nvidia's hardware just doesn't have that. Now, does that mean that Nvidia's hardware is doomed? No, because, well, we know for a fact that Pascal is going to offer greater compute performance as a whole. Now, is that going to offset this? Well, unfortunately, we just don't know yet. It's pretty much anyone's ballgame. It does mean, though, for AMD's perspective, that they are probably quite happy, because asynchronous compute is being used by a lot of games on the consoles. For example, even infamous Second Son used it heavily, and it's probably not going to be changing anytime soon. There's multiple reasons behind that. The lower end processors inside the PS4 and Xbox One are one of those. Basically, if there's workloads that, or rather the GPU is not being fully used on the console, you might as well offload some of the work to that, rather than running through the CPU, which probably just cannot handle it. So, as I said, this is a rumour. I just want to clarify that this has not been confirmed, but if it is the case that this is true, it kinda sucks. But to be fair to Nvidia, if they only realised, let's say, halfway through the development, because it's not like, a GPU, for us, we've been waiting, let's say, I don't know how long, let's say a year now for Pascal, roughly. Well, yeah, but it's been in development a lot longer than that. So they can't just scrap half their design because there's going to be multiple tape outs, they're going to be designing it. It takes them a long time to do this. That's why, for example, at Capsaicin event, we saw that, AMD are actually planning multiple generations ahead. They're planning, Polaris, obviously. They're planning they're planning Vega and they're planning Navi, which probably is not going to be introduced until like 2019, so they're way ahead. So it's possible Nvidia are just like, well, not much we can do now. GPU designs don't massively evolve. There are some instances they do, but this is probably more of an iteration. But then, obviously, at the end of the day, I don't know because I'm not in Nvidia's R&D labs. I'd love to visit there. I think it'd be kind of cool. But all we know is that from what we've learned so far, at least according to this rumour, it probably won't be a massive night-to-day difference when it comes to asynchronous compute on Nvidia's hardware. But we can hope that that isn't the case, because it would be, at least in my opinion, better for PC gaming if it was a large improvement, because let's face it, who wants worse performance, right? Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.